Phase 3 clinical trials are where biotech investing gets brutally real. Years of science compressed into a single yes or no. And investors need a sharp, disciplined lens to navigate that moment. Quince's NEAT trial and aTyr's Phase 3 program both missed their primary endpoints, and together they give us a powerful starting point for understanding how to read these failures without overreacting. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Despite decades of better biology, smarter trial design, and stronger statistical tools, overall clinical success rates still hover around just 8.8%, barely budging over time. When a Phase 3 result hits, it instantly reprices everything: probability of success, risk-adjusted value, enterprise worth, and investor positioning, often in a single violent trading session. At the heart of the NEAT trial was a structural challenge that goes beyond Quince. What happens when the control arm itself is already doing something biologically meaningful? Corticosteroids work, but their long-term toxicity, especially in children, is a real problem. And NEAT was designed to capture the benefit while cutting the harm through red blood cell encapsulation. In steroid-adjacent diseases, background therapy, patient variability, and trial length all quietly squeeze the measurable effect size, making it genuinely hard to prove incremental benefit in a registrational trial. Both NEAT and aTyr showed directionally promising signals, but missed their primary endpoints, not because the biology was wrong, but because aggressive tapering and strong control arm performance created the same structural headwind in both trials. Phase 3 readouts often say less about biological plausibility than about endpoint construction, variability, and trial dynamics. The day one stock move grabs all the attention, but the real investment outcome unfolds over 6, 12, and 24 months, shaped by regulatory execution, capital access, and commercial performance. A positive readout opens doors: lower cost of capital, partnership opportunities, a credible path to approval, while a negative one slams them shut, collapsing equity value and forcing existential decisions almost overnight. The 6 months after a Phase 3 readout mark a real shift. Scientific risk starts to fade, and regulatory execution and capital strategy move to the front of the story. At 6 months, winners tend to hold their gains as regulatory timelines come into focus, while failed programs keep sliding as companies cut costs, triage pipelines, and face existential repricing. For successful programs, the path from readout to value follows a clear sequence: filing a BLA or NDA, navigating regulatory review, and building toward commercial launch, with investor focus shifting at every step. By the 12-month mark, clinical success meets its toughest test, not in the lab, but in the market, where pricing, reimbursement, and real-world uptake determine whether the win actually holds. At 12 months, 3 commercial variables take center stage: pricing power, payer access, and real-world uptake. And a company needs to execute on all 3 to sustain post-approval momentum. Approval and shareholder value are not the same thing. The Sarepta effect shows how a stock can still erode when commercial performance is merely adequate and expectations were set for perfection. At the 24-month mark, Phase 3 is ancient history. The market has moved on entirely to revenue durability, margins, and whether the business can actually deliver on what the data promised. Gene therapy makes this gap especially stark, where high manufacturing costs, payer friction, and uneven site readiness can force a painful repricing, even after a clean approval. argenx shows what the best-case 24-month picture looks like: clean data, disciplined launch, and expanding indications, while failed programs by this point are often trading near cash, running out of options. Beyond the binary outcome itself, a few structural factors consistently determine how well a company holds up in the months and years after a Phase 3 readout. 3 things drive post-readout resilience: market cap, which shapes how binary the stock behaves; R&D leverage, which determines how much the readout reveals; and trial design, which sets the magnitude of the market's reaction. Small-cap biotechs swing the hardest after Phase 3 readouts because the trial often decides the company's entire fate, while large caps with diversified pipelines and cash flows absorb the same news far more steadily. Phase 3 resolves a scientific question: but it reshapes valuation over months and years. The smart approach is to enter with sized, limited exposure before the readout, preserve capital for what comes next, and scale into the story as it shifts from biology to execution, treating phase 3 as a starting point, not a finish line.